Monsta Creepypasta.
3 vampire creepypasta horror stories. They moved in quietly. No trucks, no furniture delivery, nothing. One day the house next door was empty. The next, they were there. 4 of them. 2 men and 2 women. All of them unnervingly perfect, like they've stepped out of an old photograph. At first, you didn't think much of them. People come and go, you told yourself. But there was something off about them from the start. They appeared in the daylight, sure, but they never stayed out for long. You'd see them standing in their yard, not really doing anything. No gardening, no chatting with each other, just standing, almost as if they were trying to act normal, but didn't quite know how. The first real warning sign came when your long-term neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, went missing. She lived on the other side of your house for as long as you could remember. A sweet, elderly woman who baked cookies every Sunday. One day, she just vanished. Her car was still in her driveway, her lights still on in her house, but no one could find her. The police searched for weeks but found nothing. Then it happened again, and again. Neighbors you'd known for years started disappearing. At first, it was easy to chalk up to coincidence. People move away. They leave without warning. But this was different. There was no word, no trace, just empty houses, one after another. And that's when you started noticing things about the new neighbors. They didn't eat. You never saw them carrying groceries or ordering takeout. They didn't talk to anyone else in the neighborhood. And their expressions, they never smiled. Not once. Their faces were eerily blank. Their dark eyes always staring, watching everyone around them, including you. Even when they waved at you from across the yard, their hands moved, but their faces stayed the same. The final piece clicked into place one night when they knocked on your door. It was late, maybe just past midnight. The sound startled you, ringing loud throughout your quiet house. You hesitated, peeking through the peephole. They were there. All 4 of them, standing perfectly still on your porch. "Good evening," one of the men said. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like it was rehearsed. "We're hoping you'd invite us in." The way he said it sent shivers down your spine. Not asking if they could come in, not politely waiting for an invitation like normal people. Instead, they said they were hoping, as if they were already expecting you to say yes. As if your answer was a formality, not a choice. I'm sorry, but it's really late. Can we talk another time?" You stammered. The man didn't blink. None of them did. "It's important," the woman beside him added. Her voice was just as smooth, just as wrong. "We insist." Your hand hovered over the lock, your instinct screaming at you not to turn it. "No," you finally said. "I'm sorry, but no." Their expressions didn't change, but their presence felt heavier, like the air around them had thickened. For a moment, they didn't move. Then the pounding started. Fist slammed against the door, shaking it in its frame. The wall shook with each hit, and you stumbled back, heart racing. "We can make this easy," one of them called out, their voice muffled, but still unnervingly calm. "Or we can make it hard," they shouted. The windows rattled. You swore you heard something scratching at the back door, the sound sharp and deliberate. You scrambled for your phone, dialing the police, but before you could hit call, the noises stopped. The silence was even more scarier. You crept back toward the door, your legs trembling, and peeked through the peephole again. They were still there, but this time, one of the men was changing. His body contorted, his limbs twisting unnaturally as his clothes shredded away, his face elongated, his mouth stretching wide to reveal jagged teeth. Black leathery wings erupted from his back, unfolding with a sickening crack. You stumbled away from the door, the phone slipping from your hand as the creature let out a guttural screech. You thought they'd break in right then and there, tear through the walls and take you, but they didn't. Instead, the bat-like creature gave one final scream, then launched itself into the air. You heard the flapping of its massive wings as it disappeared into the night, and the others followed, slipping away into the darkness as if they had never been there. When the police arrived, you didn't know what to say, but a gang is who you told them attacked you. That was the best you can come up with. You couldn't exactly tell them that your neighbors were vampires or whatever they were, but you knew. The next day, their house was empty again, no sign they'd ever been there, and the disappearances, they stopped. You don't know why they didn't take you that night. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they didn't want to. But every so often, when you're alone in your house, you think you see movement out of the corner of your eye, a shadow slipping past the window, or a faint sound of wings in the distance, and you wonder if they'll ever come back. You said it happened a few years ago during a road trip with your friends. You didn't tell me the name of the town. You said you couldn't. The government made sure of that. But you swore it was real, a little place tucked away in the middle of nowhere. You told me the trip started like any other, just a group of friends hitting the road, looking for adventure. No real plan, no big destinations, just driving until you found somewhere to stop. On the third night, you stumbled across this teeny, worn-out town. You found a motel, cheap, maybe a little too cheap, but it was late, and no one wanted to keep driving. Everything seemed fine at first. You checked in, grabbed some food at a diner down the road, and headed back to the motel. But you said the place felt wrong, too quiet, like something was watching you, even though there was no one else around. Then, on the third night, it started. You said it was a scream that woke you up. Not just any scream, though. You said it sounded like a man at first, but there was something twisted about it. Too high-pitched, too long. It made your skin crawl. At first, you thought it was a dream. Then you heard it again, louder this time. That's when you texted your friends in the next room, asking them if they heard it. They did. The four of you met in your room, debating whether or not to check it out. That's when you heard the crash, glass breaking, somewhere outside. Then another scream. Your friend Jeremy was the first to look. You said he peeked through the curtains, and his face went pale. He wouldn't even speak, just motioned for you to come look. And when you did, there were people in the parking lot. At least, you thought they were people at first. They were pale, almost glowing under the flickering lights. They moved fast, jerking like puppets on strings, their limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. And their faces, you said their faces didn't look human. Then you saw one of them leap straight onto the roof of a car. You said it shouldn't have been possible. No human could move like that. That's when you realized it wasn't just one or two of them. They were everywhere. You told me that's when you saw it. Some of the weird people lunged at a man and woman in the parking lot. They was running and screaming for help, but they got caught so fast. You said they tore into the couple, ripping them apart like they were nothing. Another woman tried to run toward the motel office, but one of them jumped in front of her. You said she didn't even have time to scream before they snapped her neck, twisting it all the way around. There were more people, families staying at the motel, screaming and trying to escape. You said one of the humanoids threw a man straight through a car windshield, the glass shattering like paper. The worst part, you told me, was the sound. Bones breaking, people screaming, the wet crunch as the creatures fed. You told me you and your friends locked the door and turned off the lights, trying not to make a sound. You said your heart was pounding so hard you thought they would hear it. For a while, it was quiet. Then came the knocking. It wasn't at your door, at least not yet. But you said you could hear them, moving from room to room, getting closer. A slow, deliberate knock, like they were playing with you. And then a knock, knock, knock on your door. You and your friends didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then came the voice, low, gravelly, almost a growl. "We know you're in there." You said the voice sounded demonic. You and your friends didn't answer, but they didn't stop. The knocking turned into pounding, loud enough to vibrate the room. Then came the scratching, long, slow scrapes down the door, like claws on wood. You told me you thought they were going to break in at any second. You thought that it was the end for you and your friends. But then, everything went quiet. And when y'all looked out the windows, they were dragging people they killed off into the surrounding woods. You waited for what felt like hours before daring to poke your head outside. And when you did, they were gone. The parking lot was empty. The night was still. The next morning, you guys tried to leave town, but the roads were blocked. Military trucks were everywhere. Soldiers patrolling the streets, telling everyone to stay inside. You told me you overheard something. 2 soldiers talking when they thought no one could hear. One of them said, "It's worse than last time." You said the government cleared out the whole town within hours. No explanations, just questions. What did you see? Who did you tell? And then the warnings. When the men in suits approached you and your friends, you told me they made you guys swear to stay quiet. They said it was a gas leak or a chemical spill or something else no one would believe. But you know the truth. You told me the screams still haunt you sometimes. And the faces, those inhuman faces staring at you from the dark. You said you still wonder why you and your friends were spared, and it keeps you up at night, hoping that you will never encounter them again. You said it happened when you were a teenager, just old enough to stay home while your parents were away. It started on an ordinary Friday night, with your mom coming home from the bar. She'd gone out with her friends, nothing unusual, but when she walked through the door, you noticed something was off. She was holding her neck, pressing her fingers against it like she was in severe pain. You saw blood on her hand, just a streak, but enough to make you stare. When you asked her what was wrong, she brushed it off. "I scratched myself, no need to be worried," she said, her voice shaky but firm. But you did worry. Over the next few days, things got strange. Your mom started sleeping during the day, not napping, sleeping. You'd come home from school and she'd be in the bed, her room dark and curtains drawn tight. When she finally woke up, it was like she wasn't really her. She moved slower, like her body was too heavy, but her eyes were sharp, almost too sharp. They seemed to follow your every move, like she was watching you for reasons you didn't understand. Your dad never noticed. He was working overtime, practically living at the factory. When he was home, he was dead to the world, asleep on the couch or in bed. He didn't see the way your mom started acting around food, how she barely touched it, or the way she'd leave the house late at night without a word, only to come back just before dawn. And then there were the animals. At first, it was small things. You found a dead squirrel in the yard one morning, its body limp but its neck torn open like something had bitten it. Then it was a stray cat, its blood staining the grass. You didn't want to believe your mom had anything to do with it, but deep down, you knew. One night, you heard her in the backyard. You looked out your bedroom window and saw her crouched in the shadows, holding something in her hands. A rabbit. You watched as she bit into it, her teeth sinking into its flesh, the blood running down her chin. You froze, your mind screaming at you to look away, but you couldn't. You just stood there, trembling, watching your mom devour that poor animal like she was starving. That was the first time you felt real fear. But the night that burned into your memory forever came a few weeks later. It was late, and you couldn't sleep. You'd been lying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, when you heard something, a soft creak, like someone moving in the hallway. You got up, your heart pounding, and peeked out of your room. That's when you saw her. Your mom was standing over your dad, who was asleep in his recliner. Her face was close to his neck, so close you thought she was kissing him at first. But then she turned her head, just enough for you to see her face. It wasn't her face, not really. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes weren't human anymore. They were black, bottomless, like looking into a void. Her mouth was open, her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were too long, too sharp. Her entire face was twisted, stretched into something monstrous. She was about to bite him. You gasped before you could stop yourself, and her head snapped up. She saw you. For a moment, neither of you moved. Then she hissed, a low hiss that made your blood run cold. You bolted, running back to your bedroom and slamming your door behind you. You threw yourself onto the bed and pulled the blankets up over your head, shaking so hard that you thought your teeth would shatter. You could hear her outside your door, her footsteps slow and deliberate. Then the door creaked open. You held your breath, praying she wouldn't come closer. You could hear her breathing heavy and wet, and then a hiss. But she didn't come in. After what felt like an eternity, her footsteps retreated and the door clicked shut. Her behavior got worse after that. She stayed out longer, and when she came back, you could smell it on her. Blood. Not animal blood either. It was thicker, darker, clinging to her clothes and skin. One night, you thought you heard screaming in the distance, and when your mom came home, her mouth was smeared with something red. You didn't ask questions. Well, you were too scared to. The night the strangers came was the last straw. Your dad was at work, and you were alone with her. She'd been pacing the house all evening, muttering to herself, her eyes darting to you every few minutes like she was trying to decide something. Then there was a knock at the door. When you opened it, 3 people were standing there, a man and 2 women, dressed in dark clothes, their faces grim. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't ask permission. "We're here for your mother," the man said. Before you could react, they pushed past you and headed straight for your parents' room. They dragged her inside and shut the door, leaving you alone in the living room. You heard screaming, not the kind of scream you'd ever heard before. It was guttural, inhuman, full of rage and pain. There were crashes, thuds, and voices chanting something you couldn't understand. Then, silence. The man came out first, his face unreadable. "Stay out of the room until morning," he said, "and don't tell anyone about this." You didn't argue. The next morning, your mom was back to normal. She didn't remember anything. At least, that's what she said. But you remembered. You remembered the animals, the blood, the screams. You remembered her face, deformed and monstrous, staring at you in the dark. And sometimes, once night hits, you wonder if it's really over, if those strangers truly cured her, or if they just buried whatever it was, waiting for the right moment to take over her again. Because sometimes, when you look at her, you still see it, just for a second. And you wonder if she sees it in you too.